Professor Chomsky, welcome back to the show.
Pleased to be with you.
Yes, thank you very much for being on. It's an honor to have you back on this show. And I just want to let you know that I appreciate all the support that you've shown to this show over the years by being a guest on repeatedly. This is the 250th episode of the show, so it's a big deal to have you on. You're first on back on episode 24, which was 6 years ago. And I appreciate you being a guest and just for all of the support that you've given to the show over the years.
Happy to join you on this auspicious occasion.
So I, of course, have many different political questions that I'd like to ask you today, but I thought I'd just ask something that's not political and just something that I've actually been wondering about. Are there any rock and roll bands that you like, or sitcoms that you enjoy, or Hollywood movies that maybe people would be surprised to hear that you're a fan of?
I'm pretty conservative in my tastes. My interest in Hollywood ended about 40, 50 years ago. There were a lot of great films then.
Well, what's a film that you did like from back then?
What was the film?
Yeah, what is a film that you liked from back then?
Well, there's one film that I sat through twice in a row, so I guess I liked that one. Charlie Chaplin, City Lights.
Well, Professor Chomsky, I wanted to ask you many different political questions today, and just another one that is kind of general that I've wondered about a bit is in regards to your political opinions over the years, because you've been a well-respected political commentator for many decades now. And I'm just curious, has your political opinions changed on any specific issue over the years? I mean, is there anything that you look back on and think, I have a little bit of a different take now?
There are things I think I should have pursued more intensively than I did. So, for example, I don't know how far back you want to go. There are plenty of examples, but let's take the Indochina War, which consumed a great deal of my energy and effort in the 1960s. I began working on it hard in 1961 when Kennedy started sharply escalating the war against South Vietnam. And I realized I really should have started 10 years earlier, not then. In fact, even then, practically nobody was interested. But so probably not much could have been done before, but efforts should have been made. You can say the same about climate change. So I was informed in the early 70s by personal friends, leading specialists on climate, that it was going to be a very serious issue. But I didn't do as much about it as I should have till years later. And there are plenty of things like that.
Well, one topic that I wanted to get some clarification on is in regards to Syria and the gas attacks. I know that you spoke out against the suppression of the OPCW whistleblower report. And I guess I was just wondering, because previously when you and I spoke, you seemed to be receptive to the idea that Assad did gas his own people, specifically in regards to Duma and the gas attack that allegedly took place there on April 7th, 2018. Do you believe that that did take place?
Probably. But I think, nevertheless, the OPCC critics should be allowed a public voice. No contradiction. Assad was certainly capable of it, total monster, carried out horrible atrocities. And it's quite possible that he was responsible for these, as the OPCW claims. But there are critics inside the organization, and their voices should not be suppressed.
So why do you believe that they are being suppressed?
They are being suppressed?
Why do you think that they're being suppressed?
I have no idea. That's something internal to the OPCW, which we don't know about. They may be under outside pressure. There may be something else.
So I also wanted to ask you about the COVID vaccine. I know that you're of the mind that vaccine skepticism is really indicative of a breakdown in the social order. And I do understand that perspective. But I guess I'm also wondering, do you believe that some of the COVID policies that have been put in place, and do you believe that the prospect of vaccine passports, that large corporations, Silicon Valley, maybe even intelligence agencies, that they could utilize those for nefarious purposes?
It's conceivable. Vaccine mandates have been in place for a long time. Nobody ever questioned them. You want to send your kid to school, they have to have vaccines. Well, it's conceivable that somebody might use that long-standing policy for nefarious purposes, but until the recent radical breakdown in social order, nobody raised that remote contingency. And it's the same today. Yes, of course, it's conceivable. There's no sign of it. They make very good sense. And we should be protecting working people, customers, others, from the threat of those who want to feel free to spread deadly diseases. We should, just as you protect children in school. Take, say, traffic rules. Suppose I say, I don't want to stop at a red light. It infringes on my liberty. Well, I think the community has a right to tell me, if you don't want to stop at a red light, go somewhere else and don't drive on our roads. It could be, you can imagine that the state might use those rules to coerce and control people. But that remote contingency has never occurred to anybody prior to the current social collapse. So yes, that's true of all regulations that communities establish to protect themselves. It's possible that they could be overused, but that's hardly an argument against imposing traffic rules or vaccination requirements for children in schools, or requiring that people who want to, say, go to a restaurant not endanger the employees and the customers by refusing to wear a mask. Yes, same. It's the same, basically.
From a technological perspective, do you find anything, a little worrisome insofar as using these vaccine passports? Or I know in Australia, some folks had to take pictures of themselves or use GPS to report of where their whereabouts are. Again, do you think that maybe any of these could conceivably, be used for nefarious purposes by big tech, by intelligence agencies?
Could be. Even more so, traffic rules. All the surveillance at traffic stops, for example, or along the way, could be used to control people. For example, you can imagine with modern technology that these surveillance cameras put up to catch people speeding and so on might be able to collect personal information about you. And until the modern contemporary period of social breakdown, nobody bothered with that. But it's certainly possible. So let's stop traffic rules. Good idea. Could be used for this purpose.
Are you supportive of Joe Biden and the Department of Labor using regulations to mandate vaccines or proof of negative testing?
What they're doing, it's not requiring. It's requiring either vaccination or regular testing. If people want to feel free to kill others, sorry, community has a right, the workforce has a right to defend themselves against them. If you want to feel free to kill others, go somewhere else.
Well, just to be clear on that statement, so I believe that vaccinated people still can spread the disease, right? So, I mean, conceivably, whether you're vaccinated or not, you can still spread COVID.
Sorry, probabilities are extremely low. Take a look at the hospitals that are overflowing in states like Idaho, Alabama, the non-vaccinated states. The hospitals are overflowing, crushed with almost 100% unvaccinated people, to the extent that hospitals even have to refuse normal procedures. This is really murderous. It's killing hundreds of thousands of people. This is not a joke, quite apart from the enormous social cost. I mean, it's getting to the point where healthcare workers are simply pulling out because it's impossible to survive under the crushing impact of people who refuse to be willing to protect others. Some of them may have valid reasons, but overwhelmingly it's simply people who, because of various scare stories that circulate mostly in the right wing, have made people frightened to take vaccines or unwilling to do so. Partly it's the kind of thing you're talking about, fear that the government might overuse it, just as they could easily overuse traffic surveillance. That one's a cinch. We have the equipment in place already. Yes, so I think that the proposal that workers in a workplace be protected either by vaccination or regular tests, I think that that's a perfectly valid proposal.
So last question on this is in regards to other countries. I know that some voices on the left have been concerned that vaccines are not getting to many third world countries. However, I believe that there also is a great deal of skepticism among those populations where they're saying that they don't want it, especially in Africa. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on there. Why do you think that there is so much vaccine hesitancy in the global South?
Global South, there is overwhelming demand for vaccines, overwhelming. They are pleading for the West to stop hoarding the vaccines and to let them have them so that they can overcome the terrible effect of non-vaccination. That is the overwhelming majority. Now, the anti-vax movements have been able to pick up bits and pieces of places where people say, I don't want a vaccine. And they can put that up on social media and pretend that's the global South. Global South is the opposite. If we should offer them vaccines. If they don't want to take it, which is extremely unlikely, then it becomes their problem. Right now, it's our problem. It's our refusal to provide them with the vaccines they are pleading for. That's the overwhelming reality, okay? If after we overcome this and provide them with the vaccines, they say we don't want them, something which I doubt very much, then it'll be their problem. No, it's not. No, it's not our problem.
So I guess just one final question on this. When you talk about folks having the freedom to separate if they don't want to abide by these vaccine mandates, what would that look like on a practical level? Does that mean that folks need to just stay home and have like groceries delivered to them? Does it mean like separated communities of folks who are unvaccinated, or just how do you think this would practically play out?
Same way as with people who say that I don't want to accept traffic rules. I suppose there were people who said it's an attack on my liberty to make me stop at a red light. It's government overreach. We don't want the state to have that power over my private life. Well, such people they should have the decency to remove themselves from the community. If they refuse to do that, then measures have to be taken to safeguard the community from them. Then comes the practical question that you ask, how can we get food to them? Well, that's actually their problem. Of course, if they really become destitute, then yes, you'd have to move in with some measure to secure their survival, just as you do with people in jail, for example. But that's really not the issue. The issue is if people say, I want to be a killer, I don't want to stop at a red light, fine, go somewhere where you're not endangering the community. And since you treasure your liberty so much, find a way to secure it for yourself.
So one thing that kind of confuses me from a political perspective in regards to the Democratic Party and their political calculus is the new wave of austerity that we're seeing in regards to the unemployment benefits, the COVID era unemployment benefits being rolled back, also the eviction moratorium. And in February, we're set to see student loan payments resume for the first time in almost 2 years. And this is a little confusing to me. I'm just kind of wondering why Democrats would be doing this going into the 2022 election. Do you have any thoughts on why this is happening?
That's happening because of the Republicans and the right-wing Democrats. It's not the Democratic Party. It's the Republicans who are 100% rock solid opposed to anything that might harm the interests of the ultra rich and the corporate sector. We saw it again today. Read the business pages this morning, okay? This morning, right now. I have it right in front of me if you want me to quote it. The Republican Party and the right-wing Democrats, who are mislabeled moderate, are moving to ensure that the Internal Revenue Service cannot investigate rich tax cheats. Okay, that's the Republican Party. You can't even investigate tax cheating by the very rich. Okay, very clear. As far as the unemployment benefits are concerned, they were very beneficial to working people. Under right-wing pressure, they've had to be canceled. It's had no effect on employment. We now have evidence on that. People are not going back to work for quite good reasons. They don't want to go back to the rotten, dangerous jobs that have been created by 40 years of the neoliberal assault. They don't want to go back to them. It's a strike. It's basically a strike, a massive strike against horrible working conditions, lowering of wages, creating a precarious economy for the benefit of the super rich. Started by Reagan, picked up by others. After 40 years of that, people are resisting. Okay? Understandable.
But just to be clear, I believe there is some debate over whether or not Joe Biden could write off student loan debt. Do you have any thoughts on why he wouldn't do that?
He could. You're saying he might say by executive order.
Yes.
Rule Congress. Yes, he could.
But if the president has the power to pause student loan payments, doesn't that suggest that he has the power to get rid of them?
He could try an executive order to overrule the right wing, the far right efforts to harm the population and benefit the very rich. He could try that. It would immediately start a series of lawsuits by major corporations, tie up the courts for 15 years. They have enormous resources. It would mean more fossil fuel and corporate funding for the right-wing Democrats and Republicans. They would give them more incentive and they'd be able to get public opinion to back them through the kinds of things you're saying, to try to stymie the rest of the program. So he could do that, but it would be political suicide.
As I see it, the current course is political suicide because, again, in February, you're going to have 45 million people in this country who weren't making student loan payments for the past 2 years, having to effectively make another mortgage payment every month. That seems like it could be just catastrophic to the economy and civil society.
That's right. The right wing and the positions you're advocating have set up a situation in which there's no easy way out. If you follow what the Republicans 100% and the right-wing Democrats are demanding, it's very harmful to the country and to the prospects for the Democrats. In fact, that's exactly why they're doing it. They're quite open about it. As McConnell put it very clearly, explicitly, we have to make sure the country's ungovernable, meaning harm the country as much as possible, and then we can blame it on the Democrats. That's the right wing, including the right-wing Democrats, Manchin, Sinema, others. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is Democrats could try to ram it through anyway somehow with end runs like executive action, which would be a gift to the far right, gift to the far right. They could then start a huge propaganda campaign about how you're just a bunch of fascists trying to overthrow democratic rule. They could tie it all up in corporate lawsuits. Corporations have huge batteries of lawyers who are willing, eager to go to the courts and stop everything for years. So it would be suicidal. So they've done the right wing has done quite well in setting up conditions on which they can harm the country badly and gain from it politically. Yes, that was true. Something like that happened during the Obama years. Plenty of guilt to go around on all sides, including Obama. But McConnell was very explicit in saying, as soon as Obama was elected, our one goal is to make sure that he can achieve nothing, okay? So the stimulus efforts were much less than they should have been, dragging out the recession, harming people, making it more possible for the business right-wing offensive to blame the government for it, along with Obama's own actions, which we could go into, that brought about the Republican wave. Now the Republicans who recognize that they are a minority party are working very hard to try to ensure that they can maintain minority rule indefinitely by voting restrictions which prevent the wrong people from voting. If you look at elections, Republicans almost always lose the elections, but nevertheless have a majority in the House and the Senate, sometimes even the presidency. And the only way to hold on to that is by blocking voting and preventing what's happening right now in Congress, an effort by mainstream Democrats to put through a Voting Rights Act. Republicans are 100% opposed. The right-wing Democrats are opposed. They don't want to secure voting rights for people in this country, just like they don't want the Internal Revenue Service to be able to inspect tax cheating by rich people. Okay? It's happening right in front of our eyes. Today, the vote is coming up. It'll probably be turned down.
So just back to student loans for a minute. In terms of the debt holders themselves, what do you think they should do? Would you be supportive of a student loan debt strike when payments resume?
Debt strike, tenant.
Of the 45 million people who owe student loans?
Sorry.
Would you be supportive of the 45 million people who owe student loans when those payments resume, going on debt strike and not continuing not to make payments?
Depends who they are. If it's renters, they may have a case. Renting is going way out of sight. Okay? If we lived in a decent society that cares about people, there would be efforts being made to protect people who cannot find a home at a livable price, since the right wing will not permit us to be a decent society. People will have to find some way to defend themselves. As long as the right wing and the business sector are committed to ensuring the demands of the ultra rich in the corporate sector, we're going to be way behind the rest of the world. We already are way behind the developed world. It's a scandal. This is the richest, most country in history, advantages that no other country has. We rank way at the bottom of the rich countries in providing elementary human rights. We're the worst in the health system, virtually twice the expenditure of others, some of the worst health outcomes. We don't have childcare. People are forced to work a month longer than they do in comparable countries. We have a rising mortality, which no country has. Yes, the right wing and the business sector have put a stranglehold on the country, which is harming it severely. And under those circumstances, people have to find some way to protect themselves.
So another topic that I wanted to ask you about today was independent progressive media, because there was a bit of a spat online this spring and summer. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, between the Young Turks and Jimmy Dore and award-winning journalist Aaron Mate, who I know that you've done interviews with previously. What happened was TYT essentially accused Aaron Mate of being in league with Putin and Assad, being paid by the Russians.
They said Aaron Mate yelled at me. And so
Aaron Mate lied. Aaron Mate. Everyone cares what Aaron Mate has to say, right?
Okay.
The guy who denies that Syrian children were killed with chemical attacks. Yeah.
And
fuck
gets
Aaron
paid by
Mate.
the.
Yeah, fuck you.
Anyway,
let's move on.
Russians.
Let's end the freaking pod. I can't.
Okay, see, that's what happens.
I can't stand that guy, and I can't stand the very intentional disinformation they put out there in regard to disgusting dictators around the world. The very people they seem to be working for, to be quite honest with you.
During this feud, one thing that kind of got more publicity is the fact that there was a $20 million investment into TYT by Jeffrey Katzenberg and others back in 2017. And, this has kind of raised some questions about TYT and, where their sort of values are, how they're reporting the news. I guess I'm just wondering overall, do you think that there is enough scrutiny into self-proclaimed progressive media and what they are reporting?
What progressive media are you talking about?
Well, specifically TYT, but there's also been criticisms of The Intercept, even Democracy Now!, to be honest, and the coverage of the Arab Spring. I know that there's been some folks critical of that. Do you think that there is just enough focus on the left as to whether these self-proclaimed progressive outlets are truly being anti-imperialist?
Well, my concern is to pay attention to 99.9% of what's happening and leave the 0.1% to people who want to spend their time on gossip columns. Okay, so I don't follow it.
Okay, but I mean, wouldn't it be concerning if, again, you have these large investments into these, self-proclaimed progressive media outlets and then having them go after award-winning journalists and saying that they're paid for by Russia?
Show me the evidence that they are being paid by Russia, and I'll take a look at it. I have looked. What I see is gossip, the kind of gossip you can make up by picking up a little factoid here, another little factoid here, and weaving it together into something. If there's anything more, you could take a look at it. It would be a fraction of 1% of what happens with the right wing and the establishment system. So it's a way to deflect attention from what's happening in front of our eyes. But nevertheless, if there's anything real, yes, if you can find out that Democracy Now! is being paid by the Russians, I'll have a look. There's not a tidbit of information about that, nothing.
No, just to be clear, so TYT is who received Jeffrey Katzenberg money, and that's documented. That's something that's been reported. They made allegations against Aaron Mate that he was, in league with Putin and Assad, and that he was being paid for by the Russians. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here is,
show me the evidence that Aaron Mate is being paid by the Russians.
Exactly, and there is none. So I guess what my question is do you?
No, is there any evidence? Yes or no?
No, there's not.
No, then let's stop talking about it.
But what I'm trying to get at here is, do you think it's concerning that there are self-proclaimed progressive media outlets who have adopted this sort of neo-McCarthyism, who have adopted imperialist talking points against Russia, against Syria, against China? Do you find that concerning that folks who think that they're on the left are being fed these imperialist talking points?
Tell me exactly what you're talking about. What charge are you claiming is taking up the imperialist line?
Well, specifically when you have Aaron Mate, who reported on the OPCW whistleblower report, who has reported on what's been happening on the ground in Syria, who won an award for debunking Russiagate and showing how Russiagate was a complete fraud. When you have progressive media outlets trying to slander him and smear him, saying that he is being paid for by the Russians.
Well, what slander do you have in mind?
Saying that he's being paid for by the Russians because of the fact that
if anybody says that, of course I would condemn it. I also thought that Russiagate was a total fraud and said so openly. I get slandered all the time. You want a list? I'll send you my mail sometime. Tons of slander from right, left, everyone else. Okay, that's their game. They want to slander. I'd rather go look at the important problems.
But isn't it concerning if you have folks on the left effectively being fed this sort of disinformation that is in line with what the CIA and the military industrial complex would want us to believe in regards to, again, Russia, China, just a general sense of neo-McCarthyism?
You want me to show you my mail? I get tons of slander of exactly that kind from the left, and I trash it, okay? If somebody has something substantive to say, I'll look at it. If it's slander, it goes into the trash.
Zooming out from that a little bit and looking at the political landscape, do you think that there's anyone in Congress who is sufficiently anti-imperialist?
Who's anti-imperialist?
Yes.
Sufficiently? I don't think you can find a handful of people in the country who, at least by my standards, are sufficiently anti-imperialist. But there are very good people in Congress who I strongly support. But I don't have to agree with them on everything. They may not agree with me that the labor contract is illegitimate and people should not be forced to subordinate themselves to a master. Like I don't think that's, but if they don't agree with me on that, I don't write them off and say they're capitalist pigs. Okay.
I guess I'm just wondering, on an issue like this, where it's so consequential, where there's life and death issues happening around the world because of U.S.
Like which one, for example?
So in Cuba, with the sanctions there, for example, again,
Cuban sanctions are a major atrocity and crime. The entire world agrees with that. The latest vote at the United Nations was 184-2. Israel votes with the United States because it has to. It's a client state. So that means universally the world opposes the sanctions. I've opposed them for 60 years. So I don't understand why you're asking.
Well, what I'm asking is in terms of, again, our political landscape, and I see that as being informed by self-proclaimed progressive independent media, but you also have many members of Congress who, are thought of as being on the far left, but who seemingly support different aspects of U.S. imperialism. So, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for example, she's kind of marketed as this radical left-wing person, but she changed her vote in regards to Iron Dome. She also seems to be supportive of Juan Guaido. We don't really see her taking hardline anti-imperialist views. So
let's take your statement apart, starting by saying she seems like this radical extremist. That's a comment about you and the United States, not by world standards. One of the editors of the world's major business press, London Financial Times, hardly a radical journal, recently pointed out that if Bernie Sanders was in Germany, he could be running on the Conservative Party ticket, Christian Democrat ticket. The United States is so skewed to the right that things that are taken for granted elsewhere in the comparable societies here are considered radical left. Okay, so we can start by dropping the phrase radical left. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has taken very respectable, courageous, important positions of a mildly social democratic kind. Okay, do I agree with everything she said? Probably not. Some things, probably not. Do we agree on every topic? I'm sure not. Can't find any two people who do. But by and large, she's had a very positive influence. Take the most important issue we face, the most important, heating up climate to the point where we won't survive. On that, Ocasio-Cortez has been a leader in Congress. It was her intervention, personal intervention, that enabled the Sunrise Movement to occupy Nancy Pelosi's office and move the Biden administration to present a moderately decent climate plan, which of course the right wing and the right wing Democrats have killed. But, and it's Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey, Senator from Massachusetts, have introduced a resolution to Congress which outlines the kind of Green New Deal that is supported by the International Energy Agency, theoretically by governments, though they don't implement it, by activists around the world. It's there because of her initiative, okay? Won't get through because of the 100% opposition of the Republicans with the support of the right-wing Democrats, but it's there, and that's important. On the Iron Dome, the real scandal is what you didn't mention and hasn't been discussed. There was a lot of eloquent rhetoric in Congress about how can we not fund measures which protect people in Israel from rockets from Gaza. How can we not protect them? Can you find one statement in the press or in Congress that said, how can we protect people in Gaza from a vicious, murderous attack using US weapons? Did you see one word?
No.
That's the problem. That's the problem. It's not whether Ocasio-Cortez voted present instead of no. That again is kind of a very minor, marginal issue. We should be facing the major issues, the ones that are suppressed. That's what the left should be doing.
I agree entirely. And I guess, that's what I'm getting at is because, when we have to compare the Democratic Party to the Republican Party, obviously, the bar is so low on so many issues. But, when is it, I guess, maybe good enough? When shouldn't we draw a line to say that we need representation in Congress by a stringently anti-imperialist voice who's going to oppose, again, the coups that we're trying to launch in countries like Venezuela and, what we're doing to people in Palestine? How
do we draw the line?
Well, again, it seems just having consistent standards by saying that somebody who supporting someone who is consistently anti-imperialist, and if you're not going to be consistently anti-imperialist, then not supporting them.
So we won't vote for them, right?
Yes.
In other words, you're suggesting we vote for the far right. There is such a thing as arithmetic, which we can't ignore. If an election comes up, and if you're on the left, on the traditional left at least, you say, well, okay, I'll take 5 minutes away from my political activity and see if there's somebody to vote against. If there's somebody to vote against, I'll take off a little time and push the lever for their opponent. That's the traditional left. Now, the modern left, a lot of it has just bought into establishment propaganda, almost totally. Establishment propaganda is that politics reduces to voting in an election. For the left, that was a marginal event that takes a few minutes. But now you have a large part of the left that bought the establishment line, says voting is what really counts, you got to focus on that, and then takes the completely irrational step of saying, now that I'm focused on elections, I'm going to help the far right. I'm going to help the worst people, because that is the result of not voting against them. When you get into the voting, when an election comes up, say 2020, on election day, you had three choices. One, you could just vote for Trump. Okay, that's a choice. A second choice is to say, I'm going to vote against Trump. That means pushing the Democratic lever. A third possibility is to say, I'm not going to vote. That's saying, I want to help Trump. It means reducing one vote against Trump, which is helping Trump. So here we have a part of the left, which first of all has bought the establishment line that elections are the be-all and end-all of politics. And then, having made that mistake, adds to it the further mistake of saying, I'm going to help the worst person by not voting against him. It's a strange part of the left.
I guess I'm just wondering, in supporting the Democratic Party in this way,
Not supporting the Democratic Party, voting against the Republican Party.
but has this proven effective? Like, what is an example of this having worked out in recent history? What's an example of this being an effective strategy? Because it seems as though the country is continuing to slide further and further to the right.
It's a very effective strategy by keeping out the worst. We'd be worse off if we had the far right in power. So it's an effective strategy for keeping out the right in 2% of your activist work. This has been forgotten amazingly, but for the traditional left, this was a side affair. Your actual work is what you do every day. That's politics. That's the effective strategy. Education, organizing, activism. Every couple of years, you take off a couple of minutes and say, is it worth voting against someone? Then you get back to work. Now, buying the establishment line says, is this an effective strategy? It's not intended as an effective strategy. It's a strategy to take a few minutes away from your political activity to fend off the worst. That's the strategy. Now, we have to extricate ourselves from establishment propaganda. Voting is a very small part of political work. It's worth doing every once in a while if you have to vote against somebody, okay? That's it, then you get back to work. That's real politics, that's the strategy.
Well, Professor Chomsky, I did have some patron questions for you if you have more time available.
Not much, I have to get off.
Okay. Well, in that case, I guess I did just want to ask you one final question. And again, I really do appreciate your time today, and I appreciate all the work that you've done over the years. I just want to let you know on a personal level, you've really opened my eyes in regards to corporate media propaganda and U.S. imperialism, and kind of seeing through the lies that we're being fed daily. So again, thank you for all of your work. And I just would like to ask you, in regards to your own legacy, when folks read back in the history books 100 years from now about Noam Chomsky, how would you like to be remembered? What are the most important things that you would like people of the future to know about you?
First of all, I couldn't care less what my personal legacy is. What I care about is the causes that I've been joining with other people to work on. And I hope that those are understood and the lessons from them recognized. What names are associated with it doesn't make any difference.
Professor Chomsky, again, I really do appreciate your time today. Thank you for being on the 250th episode, and hopefully we can speak again in the future.
Hope so.
Thank you.